The wreckage of the Volkesh still smoldered under the artificial lights of Dock 47. The once magnificent starfighter, sleek, predatory, and built for speed, was now a fractured husk, its cerulean hull marred with deep gashes from plasma fire. Scorch marks streaked across its nose cone, and its wings, designed to cut through the void like a razor through silk, hung limply, their edges curled inward from the heat of atmospheric re-entry. Chris Parker let out a long breath as he surveyed the damage. He'd seen wrecks before, plenty of them, in fact, but this one wasn't just another contract. This was a Valkyrie warship, and Valkyrie didn't let humans touch their tech unless they were truly desperate. And desperate was exactly what Talyn looked like. She stood just beyond the docking platform, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her shoulders hunched inward as if she were trying to fold herself into nothingness. The iridescent sheen of her lavender skin had dulled, her silver hair was unkempt, and her normally piercing amber eyes were flat and lifeless. The jumpsuit she wore hung loosely, as if she had lost weight recently, or as if she simply didn't care enough to tighten the seals. She was once one of the Valkyrie Dominion's most legendary pilots, whispered about in war rooms and flight academies across the galaxy. Talyn Kesh of the Third Fleet, the Phantom of the Stars. The kind of pilot who could dance through an asteroid field at full speed without scraping her hull. Now, she looked like a ghost of herself. Chris approached cautiously. "You're Talyn Kesh, right?" Her gaze flicked to him, then away just as quickly. "That's what they tell me." He frowned. "Well, I'm Chris. I'm the mechanic they sent to fix your ship." She didn't reply, only shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Chris had worked with plenty of pilots before. He'd seen them cocky, arrogant, panicked, furious. Hell, he'd even seen one cry over a blown engine once. But this was different. Talyn didn't look angry or frustrated. She just looked gone. He turned back to the Volkesh and whistled low. "She's been through hell, huh?" Talyn finally spoke, her voice flat. "I let her down." Chris glanced at her. "I was supposed to bring my squadron home," she murmured, staring at the wreckage as if she could still see the battle that had put her here. "I was their leader. They trusted me to guide them, and I led them into a massacre." Chris stayed quiet. He wasn't great with words. His hands usually did the talking, but he knew when someone was barely hanging on, and Talyn was standing right on that edge. "You know," he said finally, "ships are stubborn. You think they're done for, that there's no coming back, but sometimes all they need is someone who won't give up on them." He tapped the battered hull. "She's still got fight left in her." Talyn let out a hollow laugh. "Then she's got more fight left than I do." Chris studied her for a moment. Then he nodded toward the ship. "Well, lucky for both of you. I'm a damn good mechanic." For the next several days, Chris threw himself into repairing the Volkesh. He worked tirelessly, stripping away scorched plating, recalibrating damaged thrusters, and rerouting melted power conduits. But fixing a Valkyrie warship wasn't just about replacing broken parts. These ships were almost alive in their complexity, an extension of their pilots. And this ship? It was stubborn, much like its pilot. Talyn barely spoke at first. She lingered at the edge of the repair bay, watching, sometimes giving half-hearted answers when he asked technical questions. But she never offered her own insights, never corrected him when he was about to make a mistake. It was as if she had no fight left even for her own ship. Chris wasn't having that. One afternoon, as he pried open the access panel to the ship's neural core, he muttered, "I swear, Valkyrie engineers designed this just to mess with mechanics." Talyn blinked. "It's not that complicated." Chris arched an eyebrow. "You sure? Because this looks like a tangled mess of nightmares." She sighed and stepped closer. "You're routing the auxiliary power relays wrong. If you link it that way, the ship will think it's in combat mode every time you turn on the NAV system." Chris grinned. "See? Knew you still had some pilot instincts left." Talyn stiffened but didn't pull away. Instead, she crouched beside him and pointed at a junction. "Here. This needs to be adjusted first." As she worked alongside him, something shifted. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was engaging, her fingers deftly reconnecting severed conduits, her mind automatically analyzing flight data as she ran diagnostics. The fire in her movements was faint, But it was there, flickering like an ember that hadn't quite burned out. Chris noticed. "Looks like she's not the only one getting fixed up," he said casually as they wrapped up for the night. Talyn froze, her expression unreadable. Then she stood and walked away without a word. But she came back the next day. It took weeks to restore the Volkesh. Piece by piece, panel by panel, they rebuilt her. Talyn still had dark moments. Nights when Chris caught her staring blankly at the stars, haunted by ghosts he couldn't see. But she also had moments when she laughed, when her sharp wit surfaced, when she almost seemed like the pilot she used to be. The real turning point came the night they tested the ship's flight systems. Talyn sat in the cockpit, hands gripping the controls. The ship hummed beneath her, eager, waiting. But she wasn't moving. Chris watched from the ground. "What's wrong?" Talyn exhaled shakily. "I don't know if I can do this." Chris leaned against the hull. "You don't have to. But she's ready. And I think, deep down, you are too." She was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, she reached for the ignition. The Volkesh came alive with a roar, her thrusters flaring as she lifted smoothly off the ground. Talyn's fingers tightened around the controls. Chris saw it before she even realized it herself. The way her posture straightened, the way her breathing steadied, the way her eyes gleamed. Then, with a burst of light, the Volkesh shot into the sky, streaking toward the stars like she was never meant to be anywhere else. Chris grinned. "Welcome back, Phantom." The Volkesh knifed through the darkness, its engine singing as Talyn pushed the throttle forward. The stars blurred past, the ship responding to her touch like an old friend. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she wasn't drowning in memories, she was flying. Yet, the echoes of the past still lurked beneath the surface. Her HUD flickered, and for a split second, she saw them. Her lost squadron, a formation of Valkyrie starfighters, burning in the abyss. Their voices crackled over the comms, screaming her name. "Talyn, what do we do? They're everywhere. We need a way out." Static. Silence. She gritted her teeth and pulled the ship into a steep climb, forcing her breathing to steady. It was an illusion, a trick of a mind that refused to forget. Below, on the dock's control platform, Chris watched the telemetry readouts. Talyn's flight path was erratic, her maneuvers sharp but unfocused. He'd seen plenty of pilots push their ships too hard, trying to outrun something that wasn't there. After a moment, he keyed in a private channel. "Talyn?" Silence. Then, her voice tight. "I'm here. You okay up there?" Another pause. Then, softer. "I don't know." Chris leaned against the console, considering his next words carefully. "You're still carrying them with you, aren't you?" She didn't answer. Chris exhaled. "Look, I won't pretend to know what you went through. But you're here. And you're flying. That means something." Talyn swallowed hard. "And if I don't deserve to fly anymore?" Chris let out a dry chuckle. "Then I guess I wasted my damn time fixing your ship." That earned a huff of something almost like amusement. "Listen," he continued. "You didn't come back to the stars just to crash and burn. You came back because deep down, you want to fly. So do it. Fly for them. Fly for yourself." Talyn closed her eyes, gripping the controls tighter. Fly for them. She leveled the ship out, smoothing her trajectory. Her breathing steadied. For the first time in a long time, the cockpit didn't feel like a coffin. She took a slow breath and whispered, "Yeah, okay." Then she banked hard, streaking past the docking platform in a low flyby before arcing gracefully toward the upper atmosphere. Chris grinned. She still got it. The next few days passed in a blur of repair checks, recalibrations, and test flights. With each run, Talyn grew more confident, her movements smoother, more precise. But the war wasn't over, and neither was the past. Chris was elbow-deep in the Volkesh's starboard thruster when a shadow fell over him. "I need a favor." He slid out from under the ship, wiping grease from his hands. "You know, most pilots say thank you before asking for more work." Talyn crossed her arms, but there was a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. "This is serious." Chris sighed. "All right. What is it?" Talyn hesitated. Then, in a lower voice, "I need you to help me break into a Dominion outpost." Chris blinked. I'm sorry, what? Talyn's expression remained unreadable. There's classified flight data there. Logs from the battle I led my squadron into. I need to know the truth. I need to know if I was set up. Chris ran a hand through his hair. Talyn, you do realize that breaking into a Dominion military base is a terrible idea, right? She held his gaze. I don't expect you to understand, but I can't move forward without answers. Chris exhaled, shaking his head. And what happens if you don't like what you find? Her voice was quiet. Then at least I'll finally know. He studied her for a long moment. Then, with a resigned sigh, he muttered, I must be out of my damn mind. Talyn tilted her head. Is that a yes? Chris smirked. Let's just say, I've been meaning to see how good I am at hacking Valkyrie security systems. The Dominion outpost loomed ahead, its cold metallic spires rising against the backdrop of the planet's twin moons. Automated defense turrets tracked the perimeter, and high-frequency scanners pulsed in rhythmic intervals. This is insane, Chris muttered under his breath as they crouched behind a ridge. Talyn pulled a sleek data pad from her belt, her fingers moving across the screen. Correction. This is precision flying mixed with a little technical genius. Chris snorted. So basically, you fly like a lunatic and I make sure the doors open at the right time? Exactly. Chris muttered something under his breath about pilots and their death wishes, but readied his gear anyway. The plan was simple. Talyn would use the Volkesh to trigger a localized security breach, forcing the Dominion's automated systems into lockdown mode. Chris, meanwhile, would infiltrate the base under the cover of the confusion and extract the flight logs. Simple in theory. In execution? Hell in a vacuum. Talyn vaulted into her cockpit, her fingers flying over the controls. Ready? Chris gave a thumbs up from his vantage point. Just don't get shot down before I'm done. Not planning to. With a roar, the Volkesh launched into the sky, its engines flaring. The base's sensors immediately reacted, alarms blaring as targeting systems locked onto her ship. Chris took a breath. Time to move. He sprinted across the rocky terrain, slipping into the base's lower entrance as the guards rushed toward the launch platforms. Inside, the halls pulsed with red warning lights. He ducked behind a console, pulling up his hacking device. All right, he murmured. Let's see how good I really am. Above the base, Talyn twisted through the air, dodging pulse cannons and missile locks. The ship moved like it was alive, responding to her every command. She grinned despite herself. She had spent so long convinced she was broken. But up here, in the stars, she was exactly where she was meant to be. She pulled the ship into a barrel roll, narrowly avoiding a missile lock. Chris, tell me you're almost done. Static. Then, his voice, tense. Slight problem. Talyn's stomach dropped. What kind of problem? The security is a little too good, and I may have tripped an internal lockdown kind. Talyn cursed. Then, over the comms, another voice cut in. Valkyrie traitor detected. Talyn's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. It was her former commander, and he had just found her. Talyn's grip tightened on the flight controls as the voice crackled through her comms, dripping with cold authority. Talynkesh, I should have known you weren't dead. Commander Vadris. The name sent ice through her veins. He had been her mentor once, the one who'd shaped her into the pilot she had become. But now his voice carried only venom, and she knew, without a doubt, that he had been waiting for this moment. Her ship's sensors flared red. Multiple hostiles locking on. She cursed. Chris, tell me you have those logs. In the depths of the Dominion base, Chris worked furiously at the terminal. Almost. But you might want to get ready to do some crazy-ass flying, because I think I pissed off their entire security team. Talyn barely had time to react before a trio of Dominion fighters dropped from orbit, their sleek, silver forms glinting against the darkness. You're a disgrace, Talyn, Vadris continued, his voice sharp as a blade. You abandoned your squadron. You don't deserve to fly. Something in her snapped. With a flick of her wrist, she yanked the Volkesh into a sharp dive, her ship narrowly avoiding a barrage of plasma fire. The Dominion pilots broke formation, scrambling to react. Chris, move faster, she barked. You can't rush perfection, sweetheart. Talyn rolled her eyes and cut her thrusters, spinning her ship in place. The nearest Dominion fighter overshot her, and she fired, her plasma cannons shearing through its shields. The ship exploded in a violent burst of light. Still the reckless one, Vadries mused. Do you even know what you're fighting for anymore? Talyn gritted her teeth, twisting the ship into a defensive spiral as the remaining fighters circled like vultures. I'm fighting for the truth, she snapped. Vadries chuckled darkly. Then you'll die disappointed. Chris let out a triumphant laugh as the data files finished transferring. Got it. Now let's get the hell out of here. He disconnected his hacking tool and turned, only to come face to face with a squad of Dominion enforcers, their weapons raised. Oh, he muttered. This is bad. One of the guards, a towering Valkyrie in obsidian armor, sneered. Human, you're meddling in affairs far beyond your station. Chris offered a sheepish grin. Yeah, well, it's a hobby. The guards moved in, and Chris cursed under his breath. He wasn't a fighter. He was a mechanic. But that didn't mean he was out of options. His hand slipped toward his belt, fingers brushing against the small, modified EMP charge he always carried. It wouldn't do much against organic targets, but against their weapons? With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it at their feet. A burst of blue energy rippled through the corridor, and the guards' rifles shorted out instantly. Chris didn't wait. He bolted. Talyn, he shouted into the comm. I really need an exit. Talyn gritted her teeth as another blast rocked her shields. Working on it. She yanked the Volkesh into a nosedive, streaking toward the base's landing platform. Plasma fire scorched the air around her, but she ignored it, focused only on one thing. Getting Chris the hell out of there. Chris sprinted across the platform, ducking as debris rained down around him. Jump, Chris! Talyn shouted as she skimmed the surface, her ship's hatch sliding open. Chris didn't hesitate. With one last push, he leapt, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, he was weightless. Then his hands caught the edge of the hatch, and Talyn yanked him inside. She slammed the throttle forward, and the Volkesh roared skyward. But they weren't free yet. Vadries' voice returned, ice-cold. You can't outrun your past, Talyn. I'll see you burn. Her sensors screamed. A Dominion battleship had entered orbit, its massive cannons locking onto them. Chris paled. That thing's a lot bigger than us. Talyn set her jaw. We'll see about that. She banked hard, diving toward the planet's storm-laden atmosphere. Lightning crackled in the clouds below as she pushed her engines to their limits. The battleship fired. A massive plasma blast tore through the sky, barely missing them. Chris clung to the co-pilot's chair. I really hope you have a plan. Talyn's lips curled into a smirk. I do. She angled the Volkesh toward the thickest storm bank, the turbulence slamming against their hull. Lightning danced in the sky, a chaotic web of energy. The Dominion fighters hesitated. The storm was too unstable, too dangerous. But Talyn? She thrived in chaos. She dove straight in. The cockpit was a whirlwind of warning sirens and flashing lights as the ship rocked violently. Chris braced himself, watching as Talyn weaved between forks of lightning with impossible precision. You're insane, he shouted. Talyn's grin widened. You're just figuring that out? Behind them, the Dominion fighters hesitated at the storm's edge. Then, one by one, they peeled away. Chris exhaled in relief. They're not following. We made it. Talyn's smirk faded. Not yet. A shadow loomed in the clouds. Vadries' personal fighter. Unlike the others, he didn't hesitate. He dove after them, his cannons blazing. Talyn's fingers tightened on the controls. You want me, old man? She murmured. Then let's finish this. She jerked the ship into a sharp climb, twisting through the chaos of the storm. Vadries followed, matching her move for move. Chris stared at the display, watching as the two ships spiraled through the maelstrom. Talyn, you do realize he's got the better ship, right? She grinned. He thinks that's all that matters. Lightning crackled ahead. Talyn's eyes narrowed. Wait for it. Vadries closed in, his weapons charging for a kill shot. Almost. Chris held his breath. Then, Talyn cut her engines. The sudden stop sent her ship into freefall. Vadres, unprepared, overshot her by mere meters. Before he could react, a bolt of lightning, massive, blinding, struck his fighter dead on. The ship erupted in a violent explosion, the blast swallowed by the raging storm. Chris gaped. Holy shit. Talyn smirked, restarting the engines. Never challenge a storm pilot in her element. As the Volkesh shot through the final clouds, the storm fading behind them, Chris finally let out a breath. So, he said, I guess that means we're even now? Talyn chuckled. Not even close. Ahead, the stars stretched endlessly into the void, and for the first time in a long time, Talyn felt like she belonged among them. But there were still answers to find, still ghosts to chase, and the fight wasn't over yet. The storm-racked planet fell away beneath them, its swirling clouds nothing but a distant memory. Silence filled the cockpit as Talyn and Chris stared into the abyss of deep space, their breath slowing, their adrenaline fading. The Volkesh hummed steadily, engines stabilizing after the brutal escape. Chris exhaled, leaning back against his seat. Well, that was absolutely 100% insane. Talyn smirked. You knew what you were signing up for. He scoffed. I agreed to steal some files. Not dodge battleships, outrun assassins, and get nearly fried in a lightning storm. She arched an eyebrow. Still alive, aren't you? Chris muttered something under his breath about reckless pilots, but didn't press further. Instead, he pulled up the stolen data on his tablet, scrolling through endless flight logs, encrypted messages, and tactical reports. Talyn turned her chair to face him, her expression hardening. Find anything? Chris frowned, fingers tapping against the screen. There's a ton of encrypted stuff here. Some of it scrambled with Valkyrie military ciphers. He glanced at her. Think you can crack it? Talyn leaned over, scanning the files. Her pulse quickened when she recognized the Dominion insignia stamped on several of them. High-level command clearances, orders relayed directly to fleet captains. One file in particular stood out. Operation Silencer. Chris noticed her hesitation. That means something to you? Talyn swallowed. I've never heard of it before. Chris typed in a quick decryption sequence, bypassing minor security locks. A data stream unfolded before them. Audio logs, written orders, battle reports. The deeper they dug, the worse it got. Chris' face darkened. Talyn, this wasn't just a failed mission. She read the words on the screen, her chest tightening. The logs detailed pre-planned fleet movements, coordinates for an ambush before her squadron had ever arrived. They had been led into a slaughter. On purpose. Talyn's blood ran cold. The order had come from high command. But the approval signature? Commander Vadres. Chris looked at her, voice quiet. They set you up? Talyn barely breathed. The betrayal hit like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Her squadron had died because of him, and she had spent months drowning in guilt, thinking it was her failure. Her hands curled into fists. Chris saw the fire return to her eyes and knew exactly what she was thinking. This doesn't end here, does it? He asked. Talyn's voice was ice. No, it doesn't. Talyn didn't sleep. She sat in the cockpit, staring into the void, the stolen files looping in her mind. Vadres had orchestrated it all. The ambush, the massacre. He had fed her squad false intel, knowing they'd fly straight into death's jaws. And the Dominion had covered it up. Chris found her still in the pilot's seat when he woke. Did you even try to rest? Talyn didn't look away from the stars. I can't. Not now. Chris sighed, rubbing his temples. All right. What's the plan? Her gaze sharpened. We take the truth straight to the Dominion. Chris blinked. You mean the same Dominion that just tried to kill us? Exactly. He let out a disbelieving laugh. Wow. Okay. You Valkyrie really don't do things the easy way, do you? Talyn turned fully to face him. Vadres didn't act alone. He had backing, powerful allies who wanted my squad dead. The only way to expose them is to make this public. Chris crossed his arms. And let's say we do that. What stops them from just silencing us next? Talyn smirked. That's why we make it impossible to cover up. We don't just expose them. We make them fall. Chris gave her a long look, then sighed. You Valkyrie and your death wishes. He ran a hand through his hair. Fine. I'm in. What's our first move? Talyn leaned forward, pulling up a galactic map. A single location blinked red. The Dominion's Central Command Station. If we get in there and broadcast the truth fleet-wide, there's no way they can suppress it. Chris stared at the blinking marker, then at her, then back at the marker. You're actually serious. Talyn's smirk widened. Deadly. Infiltrating the Dominion's Central Command Station was suicide, which meant they needed help. Talyn knew just where to find it. They dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of a lawless sector, neutral space where pirates, mercenaries, and exiles thrived. The kind of place where old grudges and dangerous deals went hand in hand. Chris eyed the station warily as they approached. This place screams bad decisions. Talyn grinned. That's why I like it. They docked at an underworld trade hub, the air thick with the scent of burning metal and spilled fuel. Around them, smugglers and bounty hunters eyed them with suspicion. Chris adjusted his jacket. Remind me why we're here? Talyn scanned the crowd. Because if we're going to take on the Dominion, we need someone who hates them as much as we do. Chris muttered, so basically, a lunatic. Talyn smirked. Something like that. She spotted her target sitting in a shadowed booth, a towering reptilian warlord, his scales etched with battle scars. His cybernetic eye flickered as he noticed them. Chris took one look at the massive alien and muttered, I really don't like this plan. Talyn just grinned. Trust me. She strode forward. Hello, Cordith, she said smoothly. I hear you've been looking for payback against the Dominion. The warlord's sharp teeth gleamed. You have my attention, Valkyrie. With Corditha's network of mercenaries, they had the resources they needed. Weapons, ships, access codes, all the pieces falling into place. All they needed now was the right moment to strike. Talyn stared at the Dominion fleet reports. Vadres was stationed at Central Command. The bastard thought he was safe. He wasn't. Chris leaned against the table. So, we go in, drop the truth, and then what? Talyn's eyes burned with resolve. Then? She smirked. We start a war. Chris let out a slow breath. You are absolutely crazy. She locked eyes with him. Are you in? Chris held her gaze for a long moment. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. Hell, I've come this far. Might as well see how it ends. Talyn grinned. Good. Because this is just the beginning. The Dominion's Central Command Station, Averos Prime, hovered in the heart of the system, a vast construct of reinforced titanium and plasma shielding. It was a fortress, impenetrable to any sane attacker. Talyn had never been sane. Inside the Volkesh, she and Chris studied the holographic schematics stolen from Corditha's network. Around them, the cramped war room bustled with their newfound allies, mercenary captains, rogue smugglers, and a handful of Valkyrie defectors who had their own scores to settle. Cordith, the hulking reptilian warlord, loomed beside them, arms crossed. His deep voice rumbled through the room. You're asking us to storm the most secure Dominion station in the quadrant. You do realize that, yes? Talyn smirked. Of course. Chris threw up his hands. And, for some reason, this is the part where people don't immediately run in the opposite direction. One of Corditha's lieutenants, a wiry, cyber-enhanced human named Vance, grinned. Some of us like impossible odds. Cordith rumbled in amusement. Speak for yourself, human. He turned his massive head toward Talyn. You want my fleet. I need more than revenge to risk my people. Talyn met his gaze without flinching. Fine. You get access to Dominion weapon caches once we take Averos. You'll be armed well enough to hold off the entire Zifrin cartel for a decade. Cordith grinned, sharp and wicked. Now that is an offer. Chris muttered, Great. We're doing business with a warlord. What could possibly go wrong? Talyn leaned forward, her fingers dancing over the hollow display. The plan is simple. A small infiltration team, me, Chris, and a handful of specialists, get inside through a docking override. Meanwhile, Corditha's fleet will stage a mock attack on the Dominion border, drawing their reinforcements away. Corditha's grin widened. You want a full diversion war? I like the way you think. Chris paled. Wait. Did you just say diversion war? Talyn ignored him. Once inside, we upload the Operation Silencer logs straight into Dominion public channels. The moment those files go live, every Valkyrie pilot in the fleet will see the truth. Vadries won't be able to spin it. Chris let out a slow breath. So, we expose Vadries, force a mutiny, and get out before the station goes to hell. Talyn grinned. Exactly. Silence hung in the room. Then Cordith let out a booming laugh. Gutsy. Reckless. I approve. He clapped a massive clawed hand on Talyn's shoulder. Let's start a war. The Volkesh drifted silently toward Avros Prime, its transponder broadcasting as a Dominion repair vessel. Behind them, Cordith's fleet lurked just outside sensor range, waiting for the signal. Chris fidgeted with his stolen Dominion uniform. I look ridiculous. Talyn smirked. You look like a bureaucratic reject, which is exactly the goal. Fantastic. The docking bay doors hissed open, and they strode inside, their small team following. Chris, Vance, and two of Cordith's best infiltrators. A Dominion officer approached. You're late, he snapped. The maintenance requests were filed over an hour ago. Talyn shot him in the chest. Silenced plasma. One clean shot. Chris winced. You could have let me bluff that. No time. They dragged the body into a storage crate and moved deeper into the station. Vance worked his magic at a terminal, slicing through the security layers. Give me 5 minutes, and we'll be inside the main data hub. Chris leaned against the wall. So, Talyn, how exactly do we signal Cordith when we're ready? Talyn grinned. We don't. He attacks in 20 minutes regardless. Chris groaned. Oh, great. No pressure. The data core chamber pulsed with energy, a vast, cathedral-like space lined with Dominion control nodes. And standing at the heart of it was Commander Vadries. He turned slowly, his silver eyes gleaming. I was expecting you, Talyn. Chris whispered, well, that's never a good sign. Vadries smiled, a predator baring its teeth. Did you really think I wouldn't anticipate this? That I wouldn't prepare? Talyn tensed. You planned the ambush. Vadries nodded. Of course. Your squadron was inconvenient. Too loyal. Too honorable. The Dominion needs pilots who follow orders, not ones who question them. Talyn's rage flared white-hot. You murdered them. Vadries spread his hands. I cleansed the fleet of weakness. Chris muttered. Can we kill him now? Talyn raised her pistol, and the doors slammed shut behind them. Armed Dominion guards stepped from the shadows, weapons aimed. Vadries smirked. Did you really think I'd face you alone? Talyn's stomach dropped. Chris hissed, we are so screwed. The guards surged forward. Talyn ducked low, firing a clean shot into the nearest soldier's visor. Chris dove behind a console, laying down cover fire. But they were outnumbered. Vadries moved with inhuman precision, his blade flashing as he closed the distance. He struck, forcing Talyn into a desperate parry. You were always fast, he mused, swinging again. But not fast enough. Talyn barely dodged, her heart pounding. Then, a detonation rocked the station. The lights flickered. Cordith's fleet had arrived. Through the station's windows, explosions blossomed as Dominion warships scrambled into battle. Chris hooped. About damn time. Vadries' expression darkened. So predictable. He raised his comm. Execute Override Protocol Theta. Shut down the station's data links. Now. Talyn's eyes widened. If they severed the connection, the truth would never reach the fleet. She had seconds to act. She lunged, slamming into Vadries with everything she had. They crashed against the terminal, struggling, and Talyn saw the manual broadcast control. This is it. She grabbed a fallen blaster and fired point-blank, not at Vadries. At the data core's emergency relay. The bullet shattered the override console, and the screen flashed. Broadcast commenced. Across the Dominion fleet, thousands of pilots saw the truth. The betrayal. The massacre. And Vadries felt the moment his power crumbled. His face twisted in rage. You insignificant. Talyn punched him. Hard. Chris grinned. Oh, that was satisfying. But alarms blared overhead. The station was falling apart. Talyn grabbed Chris. We need to go. Now. Vadri staggered, fury burning in his gaze. This isn't over. Talyn smirked. Oh, I know. They sprinted for the docks. And as the Dominion fleet turned on itself, the war truly began. The Volkesh streaked through the chaos of battle, dodging plasma fire as the Dominion fleet turned upon itself. The broadcast had done its job. Pilots once loyal to the Dominion now saw the truth. And they were furious. Talyn pulled the ship into a sharp roll, narrowly avoiding an explosion as two Dominion warships opened fire on each other. Their sleek hulls shattered, debris scattering into the void. Chris was shouting over the alarms. I can't believe that actually worked. Talyn smirked. Never doubt a pilot with a vendetta. Behind them, Averos Prime was coming apart. Fires raged through its core as Valkyrie defectors and Cordatha's mercenaries stormed the station. Explosions rippled through the command spire, tearing through power conduits. But Talyn wasn't done. Her hands tightened on the controls. We need to finish this. Chris paled. Finish what? We're winning. Talyn's gaze burned. Vadri's is still alive. Chris groaned. Of course he is. They docked inside the collapsing station, plasma storms raging around them. The corridors were filled with smoke, alarms blaring. Talyn led the charge, blaster in hand, moving with lethal purpose. She found him in the command chamber, his uniform torn, his once pristine arrogance replaced with raw fury. Vadri's turned as she entered, eyes dark with murderous intent. You think you've won? He snarled. Talyn raised her weapon. No, but you've lost. Vadri's lunged. Talyn dodged, barely escaping his blade as it sliced through the air. He was fast, faster than she remembered. But she had something he didn't. Rage. She blocked his next strike, twisting away and driving her elbow into his ribs. He staggered. Chris fired from the doorway, forcing Vadri's back. But the Valkyrie commander was relentless. He slashed at Talyn again. But this time, she caught his wrist, twisting the blade from his grip. Vadri's growled. You could have been great, Talyn. A legend. She shoved him backward, leveling her blaster at his heart. I am a legend. And she pulled the trigger. The shot hit dead center. Vadri stumbled, shock flickering across his face. His knees hit the floor, his breath ragged. For the first time, he looked afraid. Talyn stared down at him, unblinking. This is for my squadron. Vadri's tried to speak. Then the station trembled, a final explosion tearing through its core. Chris grabbed Talyn's arm. We gotta go now. Talyn turned away as the flames consumed Vadri's. They ran, sprinting back to the Volkesh, barely making it as the station collapsed in on itself. The docking bay crumbled. Fires raged. Talyn launched the ship into the void just as Averos Prime exploded behind them. The shockwaves sent them spinning, but she fought the controls, dragging the ship back under control. As they leveled out, Chris let out a shaky breath. Tell me we're done. Talyn exhaled. For the first time in forever, the weight on her chest was gone. She watched as the Dominion fleet fell apart. Warships turning on their commanders, defectors breaking formation. The Dominion was dying, and she had killed it. A slow smile spread across her lips. Yeah, she said. We're done. Days later, Talyn and Chris stood on the bridge of a stolen Dominion carrier, their carrier now. The galaxy was changing. News of the broadcast had spread. The Dominion's high command was in chaos. Fleets were splitting apart. Some factions still fought for control, but others followed her. Chris nudged her. So, what now? Talyn looked out at the stars, her heart beating with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. She smirked. Now, we fly. The Volkesh roared to life, and the phantom of the stars vanished into legend once more.